In 2021, a team of archaeologists published a paper about a fireplace in the Utah desert. Not a spectacular one. A ring of charcoal, some duck bones, a few stone tools. But when they sifted the ash, they found 4 seeds. Tobacco seeds, and the hearth was 12,300 years old. That is older than agriculture, older than pottery, older than the wheel, older than writing, older than every civilization you learned about in school. And not by a little, by thousands of years. Which leaves a question that archaeology can't quite answer and can't quite drop. How long have humans been putting smoke into their bodies on purpose? Not cigarettes, not tobacco specifically, the behavior underneath all of it. Because the further back you look, the more the answer starts to look like from the beginning. Start with fire, because you can't smoke anything without it. The earliest solid evidence of controlled fire comes from Wonderwork Cave in South Africa. Burnt plant ash and charred bone, found deep inside a cave where lightning doesn't reach and wildfires don't spread. Roughly 1 million years old. 1 million years ago, we weren't Homo sapiens yet. That was Homo erectus, smaller brain, heavier brow, and apparently a working understanding of how to keep a flame alive through the night. Now hold that image, because the important part isn't the fire, it's the repetition. Every night, for a stretch of time the human mind can't really hold, our ancestors sat in caves and shelters and enclosed spaces breathing wood smoke, not occasionally, not as a treat, every single night, for something like 40,000 generations. And smoke is not one thing. Burn a plant and you release whatever that plant was made of. Alkaloids, terpenes, resins, compounds that have no interest in whether you meant to breathe them. Some of those compounds do things to a nervous system, which means that long before anybody decided to smoke anything, our ancestors were getting dosed, constantly, accidentally, by whatever happened to be in the firewood that week. Here's what makes that interesting rather than just true. The human brain has receptors that respond to cannabinoids. They didn't evolve because of cannabis. They're part of the endocannabinoid system, which handles mood, memory, appetite, pain. But the machinery was already installed and running. So the first time a human being breathed smoke from a burning cannabis plant, their brain didn't have to learn anything. The lock was already there. Somebody had just walked in with a key. And humans are extraordinarily good at one specific kind of thinking. That felt different. It happened right after that. Do it again. That's not addiction. That's cause and effect. It's arguably the exact cognitive move that made us what we are, and we applied it to everything else. So there's no particular reason to think we didn't apply it to smoke. There's a serious argument in psychopharmacology that the impulse runs deeper than curiosity. Ronald Siegel at UCLA spent much of his career on it and proposed that the pursuit of intoxication functions as a fourth drive, sitting alongside hunger, thirst, and sex. You can argue with that framing, and plenty of people have. What's harder to argue with is the pattern underneath it. Pick any human culture, on any continent, at any point in the recorded past, and you will find people doing something to change how their own mind feels. Fermenting, chewing, brewing, inhaling. It appears independently, everywhere, among groups with no contact and no shared vocabulary. Behaviors that universal usually aren't inventions, they're inheritances. So if this is that old, why does the hard evidence only go back 12,000 years? Mostly because of what smoking is made of. We have stone tools from 3 million years ago because stone doesn't rot. A wooden pipe rots. A leather pouch rots. Dried leaves rot in a season. A handful of herbs thrown onto a fire leaves behind nothing except the fire. The archaeological record isn't a record of what people did. It's a record of what happened to survive. And when it comes to this, almost nothing does. So when someone tells you the evidence begins 12,000 years ago, what they're telling you is that the evidence begins 12,000 years ago. The behavior almost certainly doesn't. But when the evidence does survive, it's spectacular. In the Pamir Mountains of western China, there's a cemetery called Jirzhankal, about 2,500 years old. In the graves, archaeologists found wooden braziers holding stones that had been heated until they cracked. Chemical analysis of the residue came back as cannabis, with THC levels well above what grows wild in the region. Somebody had been selecting for it. This was not a rope crop. And that discovery quietly vindicated a man who'd been called a fantasist for 2,000 years. Herodotus, writing in the 5th century BC, described the Scythians of the Eurasian steppe building small sealed tents, heating stones inside them, throwing hemp seeds onto the stones, and then sitting in the smoke and howling. Historians spent centuries assuming he'd exaggerated, or misunderstood what he was looking at, or simply made it up the way he was accused of making up so much else. Then archaeologists opened Scythian burial mounds and found the tent frames, the braziers, the heated stones, the hemp. He hadn't exaggerated. If anything, he undersold it. But it's a mistake to picture any of this as recreation, because for most of history, that isn't what it was for. Go to the Ebers Papyrus, Egypt, around 1550 BC, one of the oldest medical documents that survives. It prescribes inhaling smoke from heated herbs for complaints of the throat and chest, which sounds like a punchline until you notice that we still do it. Inhalers, nebulizers, anesthetic gases. The underlying reasoning was completely correct. The lungs are a fast, direct route into the bloodstream. It was the combustion that was the problem, and it took us roughly 3,500 years to sort that part out. Indian Ayurvedic texts describe a practice called dhumapana, literally smoke drinking, with specified herbs, specified conditions, and specified pipes, not folk improvisation. A protocol refined over centuries. And across the Americas, tobacco was sacred long before it was habitual. Smoke was understood as a carrier. Prayers traveled upward in it. Visions came down through it. Blowing smoke onto a person was a blessing. That framing is precisely why its use stayed measured for thousands of years. You don't chain smoke something you consider holy. There's one more function worth naming, and it's the least obvious one. Humans survived in groups. An isolated human was a dead human, and anything that made a group tighter carried real survival value. A circle of people entering an altered state together turns out to be one of the most powerful bonding mechanisms our species has ever found. Modern work on ritual shows measurable synchronization between participants and measurable increases in trust. So the smoke circle wasn't a party, it was closer to infrastructure. It's how you built the kind of trust that lets 6 people walk toward a very large animal together and all come back. Which brings us to 1492, and the part where this goes wrong. When Columbus's ships reached Cuba, 2 of his men were sent inland and came back describing people carrying rolls of burning leaves, drawing the smoke in and letting it out through the nose. Tobacco is a New World plant. Europe, Africa, and Asia had never encountered it. Within a century, they were growing it on 3 continents. And here's the thing about that transfer. The plant crossed the ocean. The framework didn't. What arrived in Europe was a substance stripped of every rule that had ever governed it. No ceremony, no restraint, no meaning attached, just the effect, available to anybody who could pay. Snuff by the 17th century, cigars by the 19th. And then, in the 1880s, a machine that could roll cigarettes faster than any human hand, and the thing became a mass-manufactured consumer product. What happened after that is documented rather than argued. Tobacco companies knew from their own internal research that their product caused cancer and spent decades and enormous sums keeping that quiet. They marketed to children. They paid doctors to appear in their advertising. They adjusted the chemistry so that nicotine arrived faster and cleared faster, which is the technical description of deliberately making something more addictive. A Mayan shaman and a 1960s tobacco executive were working with the same plant. That is the entire overlap. So, when did humans start smoking? 12,000 years ago. If you want a number, you can defend in an argument. But that hearth in Utah isn't the beginning of anything. It's just the oldest thing that happened to survive, left by a species that had already spent 1,000,000 years sitting in smoke every night, slowly noticing what it was doing to them. The plants changed, the rituals changed, the reasons changed, and then eventually got sold. But by the time anyone anywhere invented writing and thought to mention it, the behavior was already ancient, already inherited, already something people did without any memory of who'd started it. Next time you're near a fire and the wind shifts and you catch a lungful, pay attention to it. That's a very old sensation, and it's one of the very few that hasn't changed at all. Same reaction, same chemistry, same faint suspicion that there might be something in there worth staying for. Somebody, once, had that thought and didn't step back.